Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of 3 Wide. I'm your host, Radney Crawford, and today we're going to be going over Atlanta race weekend, where we had action from all three major series in NASCAR, and we're especially going to be going over the exciting Cup Series finish, where you had a 3-wide photo finish between Kyle Busch, Ryan Blaney, and race winner Daniel Suarez. We'll also discuss who is starting off on a strong note 2 races into it, and some of the drivers who are happy to be moving on from superspeedway racing. So let's go ahead and get started, but first, a word from our presenting sponsor, Hunt to Harvest. Hunt to Harvest is back to support another season of 3 Wide, and to tell you a little about them, they are a brand created to protect the hunt and to get back to the basics and the real reason for the hunt. A brand that supports the harvesting of the animal instead of just focusing on the trophy. To Hunt to Harvest, hunting is all about spending time with loved ones, providing for your family through the harvest, and giving thanks to the one who created all things. And you too can support this great mission and company by going to hunttoharvest.com and updating or upgrading your hunting apparel, where they have several new shirt designs in both short sleeve and long sleeves, and these shirts are also made out of 100% Peruvian cotton and true to size after one wash. They also have new rope hats in, but they are moving fast, so you better get your order in quick. So head on over to hunttoharvest.com, and when you check out, be sure to use the promo code RADNEY18923. That's RADNEY18923 for even more savings. Starting off with the Truck Series, you had Kyle Busch get the win in his first start with Spire Motorsports ever since they took over the KBM shop, and this was Kyle's first time in a lower series race on a superspeedway style track since his accident at Daytona back in 2015, where he broke his leg. And like I said in the intro, I want to highlight some of the drivers in each series as far as who is starting off strong and drivers who are happy to have these superspeedway races behind them. As far as the Truck Series go, you have guys like Nick Sanchez, Taylor Gray, Tyler Ankrum, Rajah Caruth, who are starting off pretty strong this season. Right now, Tyler Ankrum's the point leader. He did lead the most laps on Saturday's race at Atlanta, and he's mainly gotten this points lead thanks to some strong stage finishes, including a stage win at Daytona and 2 second-place stage finishes at Atlanta. It's tough to judge how a season will go just 2 races in, especially with the 2 races being on super speedways, but Ankrum, he is starting out this season with the best start of his career. And with this move to MHR, could it reinvigorate his career, much like it did last season with Christian Eckes when he made the move to MHR? We'll get our first good look at Las Vegas with that coming up with Ankrum. And if he can stay on the path he's on right now, he is in for a big 2024 season. Also is Rajah Caruth. He finished second at Daytona last week, albeit in a controversial finish, but nevertheless, he did finish second. And he also came away with a solid 8th place finish at Atlanta. This year, Rajah, he's with Spire Motorsports, which I think is probably the best team he could be with at this moment, and he's also got solid sponsorship behind him. He had a decent rookie year where he showed flashes, but he also made some mistakes. So this year's going to be important for him to continue to grow and to not make mistakes like we saw him make just last week at Daytona. If he's able to do that, I think he can go out and win races this year and could be one to watch come silly season as a driver that could move up to the Xfinity Series. Then you have Nick Sanchez. He got his first win last week at Daytona, along with a 5th place finish at Atlanta. And I believe Sanchez is going to be one to watch for the championship. He's young, but he did show a lot of promise last year in his rookie year. I think he was the best one in that whole group, and he's continued to build off of that. And Sanchez is a guy I think everyone should get used to seeing run up front, especially in the Truck Series. Now, on the other side of it, we have a couple drivers who are probably happy to move on from superspeedway racing, and that's Jake Garcia and Lane Riggs. For Jake Garcia, he made the move from MHR to Thor Sport, and I was a little surprised by that move. He had a decent rookie year with MHR, 3 top 5s, 9 top 10s last year at only the age of 18 years old. But he makes the move to Thor Sport, who's coming off a championship win with Ben Rhodes, and 2 races into it, he's crashed out at Daytona. He was part of an early crash on lap 6, so it's tough to know whether he would have been a factor in that race at all or not. Then this past week in Atlanta, he comes away with a 16th place finish. My main concern for Garcia is this move to Thor Sport. This team is one of the best in the Truck Series. They're always in contention for championships, for race wins, especially with drivers like Matt Crafton, Ben Rhodes, and Ty Majeski. Because they have so many trucks in the field, there always seems to be at least one of their trucks that just struggles to keep up and never really make many waves in the season. Last year was Haley Deegan in this very 13 truck, and I'm worried that Garcia could be that driver this year. Jake is still only 19 years old, still very young, so I'm sure Thor Sport will be patient with him as long as he has the funding behind him. But was this a poor choice? You had so much success with MHR in your rookie year to go into kind of this unknown, and especially with the history of this team in the Truck Series. As I said, it's difficult to judge how he's going to do after just 2 races, especially when they're on super speedways. But just reacting off what we've seen on the track so far, Garcia is got to be going for a solid day at Las Vegas. And the other driver who's glad to be moving on from this style of racing is Lane Riggs. Lane only completed 13 laps at Daytona before he had to park it. Then at Atlanta, he was disqualified and credited with a last place finish of 33rd. So not at all the start that Lane Riggs or Front Row Motorsports was looking for, especially coming off dominant seasons with Zane Smith over the past couple of years. But like Garcia, Lane is young. He's got a lot of hype around him and potential. So by no means do I mean push the panic button on either of these drivers. But if Lane wants a shot at the playoffs, especially on the point side of things, he's going to have to start knocking out some strong stage finishes and finishes overall. And it starts this weekend at Las Vegas. After the Truck Series race, we then had the Xfinity Series at Atlanta Motor Speedway, where Austin Hill yet again wins another super speedway race, this time only leading 2 laps, but we did have an overtime restart where you had drivers close to running out of fuel. And of course, right when they throw the green flag, the front row bottles up. Jesse Love, who had dominated the race up to this point, restarted in the lead. He runs out of gas just as he gets to the start-finish line. That ends up bottling up Ryan Truex. Austin Hill was able to get inside of Truex and get the lead. And because so many drivers up at the front ran out of gas and it really broke apart the pack, there was really no way anyone was going to be able to get around Austin Hill. Chandler Smith, who finished second, was the closest, but he just didn't have the help behind him to be able to get the lead away from Hill. Shane Van Gisbergen, he comes away with a 3rd place finish. You then had Sheldon Creed with a 4th place finish, another strong start for him. And also Parker Retzloff. He gets 5th place, and this is his 2nd straight top 5 finish. And with Austin Hill getting yet another super speedway win, I have to start asking the question, are we going to start seeing a revolt from these Xfinity drivers as far as helping Austin Hill? Hill is so strong at super speedways, and when he gets the lead, he's almost impossible to get around. He's just got such a strong car, and he is really talented at these tracks. So you got to think that these drivers are going to have to start leaving him out to dry, making him rely solely on his teammate to get him and keep him at the front. I'm not sure if they will actually do that or not, because they could see Austin Hill as a way of getting themselves up to the front and trying to settle it between themselves. But we'll see come Talladega if anything changes. Until that actually happens, Austin Hill, as he has been over his brief Xfinity career, is going to be the guy to beat anytime we go to a super speedway. As for some other drivers who have started out strong in the first 2 races of the Xfinity season, besides Austin Hill, you have teammates Chandler Smith and Sheldon Creed. And for Chandler, he finished 5th at Daytona, 2nd this past Saturday at Atlanta. And then you have Sheldon Creed, 2nd at Daytona and 4th at Atlanta. Chandler is going to have to be focusing on keeping this momentum up throughout the season. That's really what hurt him the most last year. He started off strong with Colleague Racing, showed a lot of speed, and then he just kind of faded as the season went on. As for Sheldon Creed, he's doing what he needs to do to stay relevant, and he's putting himself in positions to get a victory. I am still a big believer in Sheldon Creed. I don't think there's anyone better as far as raw talent in this series. It's just going to come down to him putting it all together and closing one of these races out to get the win. I think he does have a better shot of doing it with Joe Gibbs Racing. This is one of the best teams in the garage, but it's going to come down to Sheldon and if he can stay in it all the way to the checkered flag. Also, Jesse Love, while his finishes may not show it, this young driver has made the huge jump from ARCA to Xfinity and doesn't look like he's missed a beat. He's qualified on the front row in both races. He's been up front. He's led laps. He's looking like the real deal. Now, we'll get a true picture of it over these next few weeks as they go to some different style of tracks. But so far, Jesse Love doesn't appear to be all hype. He definitely walks the walk so far in his short Xfinity career. Then there's Shane Van Gisbergen. He seemed to be in about 15 wrecks at Daytona, still came away with a solid 12th place finish. Then he goes to Atlanta, just his second time on a drafting style track, and comes away with a solid third place finish. So the first big hurdle is now behind Shane. Now he can focus on what is going to be the meat of the schedule, which is 1.5 miles and short track racing. He will be the one to beat when we get to the road courses. I really look forward to seeing the battles between him and AJ Allmendinger, because these are the two best road racers in all of NASCAR, I believe. But if these two finishes he's had are if any indication on how he will perform in his inaugural full-time season in NASCAR, I could see Trackhouse pulling the trigger pretty quick and getting him up into the Cup Series sooner rather than later. As for Parker Retzlaff, he just got his highest career finish last week at Daytona with a third place. He then wraps it all up with another fifth place finish at Atlanta on Saturday. Retzlaff, I think, is going to be one of those guys that kind of flies under the radar. You don't really notice him. He doesn't make a lot of noise. He just goes out there, drives the car, and gets the most out of it he can. He had a good rookie season last year, and the big thing for him in his sophomore year is working on improving where he finished last year. And it all starts at Las Vegas, which should be pretty easy. He finished 37th last year at Vegas. But in the races where he was coming away with top 20 finishes, you want to see it start getting bumped up to top 15, top 10 finishes to continue to progress his career. Now we have the drivers who are thrilled to be moving on to Las Vegas after a rough start to their season, and the number one driver has to be Josh Williams. Josh has finally gotten the ultimate opportunity this year, getting a chance to drive for Kaulig Racing full-time in the Xfinity Series, along with some part-time starts in the Cup Series. And on the Xfinity Series side of things, he was in a crash at Daytona where he finished 34th. Then in Atlanta, he had even more issues and finished 37th. As for the Cup Series side of it, he only made 2 laps in the Cup race this past Sunday at Atlanta for Kaulig Racing before being involved in a crash. And I hate it for Josh because this is a huge opportunity for him. Could possibly be his only opportunity he'll receive with a top-tier team like Kaulig Racing. You always like to see these drivers who have run for the smaller teams get these opportunities, and we all want to see them succeed. Sometimes it happens, other times it's just not in the cards for whatever reason. Josh still has plenty of time to get this turned around, and I think the best thing he can do starting at Las Vegas, you don't necessarily have to go out there and try to lead every lap, finish in the top 5, but if you can get a solid top 15 finish, possibly a top 10, just something to build off of, number one, to get you out of the hole in the point situation that you have now, but also to kind of start building some momentum. That's going to be the key part for him right here. Just stay calm, get the momentum rolling your way, and let the results come to you as they can. Then we have Hailie Deegan. She has had finishes this season of 37th and 27th at Daytona and Atlanta. At Daytona, she was involved in a crash, only made it 22 laps in, and the crash was something that was really out of her control. So it's tough to judge her and Josh Williams on how these races would have ended if they had been able to avoid the crashes and avoid the trouble. But nevertheless, it has been a rough start for Deegan. She's never been really strong on super speedways, so at least she has that kind of to fall back on. But now she goes back to where her Xfinity career really started, when she got that part-time start at Las Vegas a couple years ago and came away with a solid top 15 finish. And like Josh Williams, I think what she needs to do is go out, complete all the laps, get a solid top 15 finish, top 10 if you can. You never know with a track Las Vegas how these races are going to work out. If we have long green flag runs, you never know which way it's going to go. Don't let these 2 races, which were wild cards, define your season. As for the main event of the weekend, the NASCAR Cup Series, once again put on the best race of the weekend, which makes it 2 in a row for this series. But before we get into the race itself and the finish, I wanted to discuss the track for just a minute. The superspeedway package that NASCAR runs really seems to work well with this new Atlanta. And the reason why I think that is because you have Atlanta surface, which ages quickly and gets worn out. Then you add in the new configuration. And I think it's the perfect combination of things with a reconfigured Atlanta. It's now a hybrid track where you have elements of superspeedway racing like Talladega and Daytona, but you also still have elements of the Atlanta of old with the wide racing surface and multiple lanes. We were able to see drivers move more around from top to bottom, getting runs on their own. And I think that's why the racing was so good here. And the racing has been good ever since the reconfiguration in this next-gen car. And with the first race of the playoffs at Atlanta this year, that is going to be an absolute race to watch because you're going to have a hot, slick surface that is even more worn out. And we saw it, especially this past weekend, where handling was a key topic of conversation. It's going to be even more key come the summertime. And with the finish we saw on Sunday night, I have no doubt that that race will be a sellout with the stands being packed because these drivers put on one whale of a show on Sunday night. So getting to the action we saw on the track, you had a very competitive race with 48 lead changes. You did have 10 cautions, but this race never felt like it was out of control. Some of the wrecks were one or two cars involved, and it was mainly because they were right there on the edge with these cars. You did have a big crash early on in between laps 1 and 2. Now that one was a little ridiculous. It knocked out so many strong cars and drivers. At least it hampered their days. But besides that one big wreck, this was a solid race. Even after some of the drivers were in their accidents, they were still competitive and running up towards the front. You had Chase Elliott, who seemed like he was in every single caution. He finished in 15th place on the lead lap. Chris Buescher, he was in a couple cautions, including one of the main ones, getting pinched up into the wall by Joey Logano to end stage 2. And Chris got some decent damage from that one. He came away with a 9th place finish. But the big headline from this race will obviously be the finish to the line. You had an intense battle for the lead, and as they're going through turns 3 and 4, coming to the checkered flag, Ryan Blaney was in the lead. You then had Kyle Busch and Daniel Suarez make a move to go 3 wide, coming through turns 3 and 4, all the way to the checkered flag in a photo finish, where Daniel Suarez just did beat Ryan Blaney to the line to get his second career victory. And what was amazing about the finish was the fact that you had these guys 3 wide, nobody got loose, nobody wrecked. It was a clean finish, and it's one that NASCAR should be running ads on for the rest of the season. Atlanta Motor Speedway, they already have the jump on it, putting out videos and shorts, advertising for the upcoming playoff race later this year. For Daniel Suarez, it was no big shock to me that he won. He has been strong at Atlanta ever since this track was reconfigured. Honestly, it's one of his better tracks, and this victory to me is even bigger than his first career victory back at Sonoma a couple years ago, because coming into this season, Suarez seemed to be on the hot seat, or at least the driver with the most pressure on him, after the signings of Shane Van Gisbergen and Zane Smith by Trackhouse. However, team owner Justin Marks did state to the media post-race that there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and he doesn't envision a Trackhouse future without Daniel Suarez. So who really knows what the future holds? But either way, I think Suarez went out there and answered and silenced all the doubters, coming out and having a strong start to the season. He may not have had the finish that really shows that at Daytona, but like at Atlanta, he was up front contending for the lead for a good part of the back end of the race. Now with Atlanta, he seals the deal, and I believe at least this does take a lot of pressure off of him. He's locked in the playoffs and can now focus on just going out, getting more stage points, possibly even more wins to have a good bank of playoff points as we get ready for the playoffs later on this year. But highlighting some of the finishers, and I mean, we could spend a whole episode on many of these drivers, but just going through some of them, you have Bubba Wallace, who I believe was involved in the first wreck. He seemed to get a piece of it, and at one point was trapped a lap down. He comes away with a 5th place finish. Austin Cindric, he finished in 4th. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. finished in 6th. Ross Chastain 7th. And then Michael McDowell, who won the pole, but did have some issues, got in some trouble staying on the lead lap. He came away with an 8th place finish. And even Harrison Burton, he had a solid day running up near the top 10, finishing in 11th. There's finishers all over the board that got the finishes they needed. But the teams that have impressed me the most over these first 2 races, granted, I know they're super speedways. It's tough to give judgments on them, but just going off what I've been seeing, I got to point out Stewart-Haas Racing. They have been very competitive at Daytona and Atlanta. You had Chase Briscoe up there at Atlanta looking like a guy who could go out and win the race until he was involved with the crash with Denny Hamlin, but he also got a top 10 at Daytona. As for Josh Berry, at one point, he was running in the top 10 as well Sunday. Ryan Preece, he was involved in the big one at Daytona, and I also believe he got a piece of the wreck at Atlanta, the lap 2 wreck. He got a solid top 20 finish yesterday. while he did finish 23rd at Daytona, he was still running up front at points. And even Noah Gragson, he got a top 10 finish at Daytona last week. So I think this is going to be the team to keep a close eye on starting at Las Vegas now, because the true test truly begins. You'll get to see and get a better gauge of where they're at as a team. And if they can go out there and have 3 or all 4 of their drivers in the top 15 or top 10 throughout the race, getting stage points, getting solid finishes like that, that could mean that Stewart-Haas Racing is finally back on track. And then there's Front Row Motorsports. They just announced a deal in this past week where they are partnering with Team Penske, and they are becoming a Tier 1 Ford team. And they've shown it here, why they've earned it here in these first couple super speedways. They've always been strong at this style of track, but when you have Michael McDowell going out and sitting on the front row of both races, even Todd Gilliland qualifying in the top 10 at Atlanta, leading the most laps in the race, being one of the more aggressive drivers that looked like he could go away with the win. I mean, this is a team on the rise and could be the next Trackhouse or RFK Racing to really start to shake things up in the series. This team could become a mainstay in the playoffs and could be a team to make a run at the championship. I'm not saying that's going to happen this year or even next, but if they continue on this path they're on with the growth that they are showing, I don't see why they couldn't get to that point. Then you have the drivers who are glad to be heading to Las Vegas, and that is Denny Hamlin. He did lead laps in both races. However, he got some mediocre finishes with finishes of 19th at Daytona and 23rd at Atlanta. Then you have drivers like Brad Keselowski, who's sitting 36th in points right now, Joe Logano, who's 33rd, and you could even say Josh Berry, who's sitting in 31st in points. He's got to be looking forward to going to Las Vegas next week. He's won there a couple times in the Xfinity Series, and this will be a good opportunity for him to have a strong run, his first real strong run, as he makes a run to the Rookie of the Year title. And that'll wrap up this week's episode of 3 Wide. As always, thank y'all for joining me and listening along. If you haven't done it already, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this podcast from. You can also find me at any of the social media pages such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The links to my pages are in the description below. Be sure to click on those links and give me a follow at any of those pages. Also, don't forget, go check out hunttoharvest.com and see their amazing selection of hunting apparel and hats. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week, and we will see y'all same time next week as we look over Las Vegas race weekend.